Introduce now Anthony. We'd like to welcome Anthony Burke, the president of Australia's largest celebrant association. Based in the Hunter Valley, Anthony is a celebrant, MC, speaker and coach. The Australian Federation of Civil Celebrants have over 2,000 celebrants offering a range of services, including funeral celebrancy. Members are supported by a national organisation with a range of benefits and resources. Anthony's going to talk about the important roles that a celebrant can play in our funeral services. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks so much for the opportunity for us to be here today. And as Vicky said, thank you to those that are online as well. I guess one thing so they can hear at home. So I guess one of the things that I get asked a little bit is, how do you fit 90 years into a 30-minute service? You know, it's a hard gig to have sometimes. Or how do you celebrate a life of somebody that's passed away at the age of 2? So I'm going to talk a little bit about those along the way. I'm a wedding celebrant as well. And yeah. As a marriage celebrant, us as celebrants are authorised by the government through the Attorney General's Department. As a funeral celebrant, nobody governs us. Anybody could be a funeral celebrant. Actually, you don't even need to do any training to be a funeral celebrant. You could just select somebody. By selecting somebody from your family to act as a celebrant takes away the opportunity for them to grieve and to mourn a death. Wikipedia says that a funeral celebrant is a formal term denoting members of a group of non-clergy professionals who are committed to preparing and delivering high-quality funeral ceremonies which are not closely linked to any religion or to belief in any afterlife. 9 out of 10 funerals that I do all have the Lord's Prayer. But yet, I'm a civil celebrant. To me, a funeral celebrant is someone who offers support and care to families, who work with families to craft a personal, professional and tailored service for the deceased, for their loved one, for that special someone. A funeral celebrant is often the second person to meet with the family. After Diane goes and meets with the family, I'm generally next in line. It could be a few hours after the person has passed. It could be one day. Sometimes the celebrant is the first port of call. A funeral celebrant needs to be flexible and open to anything that may come their way. For example, I've been a funeral celebrant for 10 years now, and very rarely do I do a service for someone that is in their 80s, 90s. The funeral directors use me for the younger services, for babies or for stillbirths, for children, for car accidents, murders, drug overdoses, and suicides. There isn't one size fits all. A service needs to be tailored to twofold. For the loved one that's passed, and Diane talked about that before, about what do they want. But equally as important is, what do you as a family want for that loved one? Because you need to be able, we hear that term, and we use it a lot, and I'm guilty of it as well, I guess, is we're going to celebrate their life. But what about mourning the death? We don't allow ourselves to mourn. Even sitting at a service, I see people holding back their tears. Tears are not a sign of weakness. They're a sign of loving someone so much, and a funeral is that prime opportunity to gather as family and friends to mourn the death, and of course we can celebrate their life. Yes, a celebrant is able to celebrate their life, but it's important to allow that family to grieve, so they go through that grieving cycle. In 2018, there were 158,493 deaths in Australia, with over 65% reported to be officiated by celebrants, and that's growing every year. When I started as a celebrant, I was 24, and it was around 30%. 30% of funerals were being conducted by celebrants. By having a celebrant, you can still have religion. You can still have a civil service. But most importantly, you can have a personal service. And the celebrant offers the family and the deceased a ceremony of choice. When I start a service, I have a blank page. So everything that the family provides to me is what forms part of the service. And yes, there's wording that we will use from time to time to connect the different parts of the service that's happening. But it's so important that I craft a service that reflects the loved one, that reflects the needs of the family as well. And sometimes that's difficult. There's been many a times, I remember one particular service I did in Canberra for someone that was murdered. And I went down to meet with the family, not knowing the history, and as a celebrant and a funeral director, you generally don't know until you start talking to the family of what you're dealing with. But someone had murdered, had thought that this family would be so devastated. But they weren't. They were okay with it. And so when I was asking questions, I got yes and no answers. So I tend to broaden those questions to just give me an insight of who this person was, and I couldn't get anything. But yet I had to go away and write a service for that loved one. They didn't like him. They hated him, is the words that they told me. But I guess for me as a celebrant, I'm there for two reasons. I'm there for the family, but I'm also there for the deceased. And everybody, no matter their past and the choices that we make, everybody deserves that send-off. Everybody deserves that respect. I said that funeral celebrants offer a ceremony of choice, allowing families to have as much or as little as they like. Being a civil celebrant, we have the option of including those religious aspects. We release doves. We have candle lighting ceremonies. Some may not agree, but we do at times release balloons into the air. The celebrant role is to bring the family and their loved ones' wishes together to create a meaningful ceremony. And Diane mentioned it a little bit before about the family giving feedback to how wonderful the ceremony was. It's so important that people walk away from the service going, that was really Bob. That was his service. It wasn't the service that Anthony did at 10 a.m. It was really his service. So there's a few things that I'd ask you to think about. What do you want in your service? What does it look like? How does it feel? Does it have readings or poems or rituals? Does it have a religious aspect? Would you like the family to have the Lord's Prayer? It's so important to note these details down, to tell of what loved one. There's so many times that a service is finished, I'll have a little old lady come up and she'll go, do you have a card? And I'll go, yes. She said, well, I want you to do my funeral. It's very well for me to give her a card, but she needs to tell somebody that she would like me to do her service. And I think that that's something, and it's already been touched on, is we don't talk about death. It's just something that we don't do, and I think it's important. So then when a funeral director, a celebrant, someone from the cemetery talks to a family, there's already been that prior conversation about what the expectation of that service is. And there's many times you walk into a family and they just don't know what they want or what the loved one wanted. But as a funeral celebrant, that's something that we're able to do. We're able to give options and ideas and listen to the family. And sometimes you could just sit there for an hour or two just listening to the family speak. And that's just enough to be able to put a service together. There's There are, and Diane and I were speaking about this before the session started today. For some funeral directors, they have in-house celebrants. Some have a recommended list, but most importantly, it's much more beneficial when a funeral director has an understanding of what the family is needing and matching that to a funeral celebrant. Of course, I could just turn up here and speak, that's fine. But will it be meaningful and personal unless you have that connection with the family? It is a difficult time currently through the pandemic, through COVID-19. I did a service in April for a 4-year-old girl. I'd met Lily maybe about 3 months before. I work alongside an organisation that raises funds to pay for funerals for children, and I donate my services. And one of the things that they have me do is go and meet the child before they pass. And so we went on Lily called it a date. We went on a date. But unfortunately, in April, we could only have 5 people at the service. So we have a funeral service for a 4-year-old with 5 people, with mum, dad, and 2 out of the 4 grandparents. And I talked about mourning, and I talked about grief, and Diane's also touched on it as well. It's so important that family has a memorial at some stage, because there are hundreds of people that didn't get the opportunity to grieve through that cycle, and they haven't had the opportunity to mourn. And that's, I think, from a funeral celebrant's perspective, I am worried about that during this time, that some will have the loved one cremated and they will have the memorial later, and they don't do that. We will see a rise in with mental health issues. So I go back to the point about thinking about what you would like in your service. Tell somebody, a family member, write it down, have it in your will if you'd like. Tell a neighbour, tell somebody. So therefore, your funeral has exactly what you'd like. But don't be surprised if your family do other things. They'll add things, they might pick different music to what you had chosen. I always reflect on what the family's telling me, and I do ask them, I go, is that what Dad would want? Sometimes it's no, and that's okay. Because as said, we've got a 2-pronged approach with a service. I'm so lucky to... it is a privilege and an honour to do someone's service, and many people say, how do you do it? It's something that over time, if I stand here doing a service and I cry a lot, I'm making it about me and not the loved one and not the family. But when there's a coffin up the front, generally I'm the closest person sitting next to it, and you don't even think about it. You think about why the family are there, all those special moments that they've had with their loved one. As Dimity mentioned, I'm the president of the Australian Federation of Civil Celebrants, and we're an organisation that's been around a bit over 25 years now. And celebrancy has changed dramatically, and it is still changing now. We are an association that celebrants can become a member of. We have a little over 2,000 members Australia-wide, and in New South Wales is our biggest cohort. Predominantly, or the majority, are married celebrants. But we do have a large range of funeral celebrants. Very rarely does a funeral celebrant go into funeral celebrancy without being a married celebrant first. There are quite a few out there where they decide that they'd like to be a funeral celebrant. But the majority of us start out as a married celebrant, and then we guide over to funerals as well. An AFCC member or a member of the association have many resources. We have 2 funeral resources guides that allow them to be the best celebrant they can be for their families or for all of their clients. They're covered by insurance and also copyright protection. It's something that we automatically include in their membership. We have a Facebook group. It's about I think there's about 1,300 of our 2,000 members that are in this group, and it's such a humbling feeling when you see celebrants, they post and they say they've got a service coming up for a gentleman or for a child or for someone, and they're able to share resources and ideas. In the funeral space, it should never be a blanket approach. We should never go into meeting a family with one or closed-minded or having just one set of questions, because that may not meet the needs of the family. So we encourage our members to give freedom of choice in the service. Of course, we have our own ideas. We have our own thoughts when speaking to a family of what that might look like, what the service can look like. But of course, we take away the wishes of the family. We're working on an enrichment program at the moment to enhance the skill level of our members. We're celebrants, so we can talk. We love talking. We love dealing with people. But we need to ensure that they have the right skills, knowledge, and resources to allow them to be the best for their family. This program is focusing on grief and trauma, and there is a difference between the both. Working with a funeral director, it's so important when I stand up the front of a service. Yes, I'm representing the family, but I'm also representing the funeral director. I work with about 9 different funeral directors, and they all operate differently. But at no matter, at any stage, I'm always representing their business. We are open to lots of different scenarios, and as mentioned before, I do lots of difficult services. One thing that celebrants need to be aware of is our self-care. You know, I see a psychologist once a month, just by choice. I talk to Lisa about all the funerals that I've done. So therefore, my family and friends aren't burdening that trauma, that grief. I'm human. I'm allowed to feel what you feel at a service. Sometimes you can't detach that. I did a service for Riley. He was on a yacht and he fell overboard, and there was a cord, and it unfortunately was tangled around his neck, and it killed him. He was 10. We had a service in a park with about 3,500 people. And during the service, there was a group of his friends come forward to the coffin, and they hugged the coffin. There was no way I was not going to cry. I'm human. We also have to be professional. But these are the things that as an association we support our members with. To be a funeral celebrant, you can have the training, but you have to be a special kind of someone. You have to be a special person. Not everybody can do it. You can study as much as you like, but I'm going to steal Diane's word that she told me before, is that they don't teach us to be natural. We have to be ourselves. And I think that's why it's so important that funeral directors match a funeral celebrant with the right family. You might be qualified, but it takes much more than that. Supporting a family through those difficult times. So I'll leave you with a thought. When that time comes, and hopefully it's quite a way down the track for you, what is the celebrant saying about you? What are they talking about? Who's at your service? What music are you having? Is there a display of photos, or you don't want that? Don't keep that with you. Have that conversation with your loved ones or with a friend. So then when that time comes, your service is your service. It's about you and it's personal. I am going to be here for a little bit at the end. I'm from the Hunter Valley, so I do have to go back afterwards. But if you have any questions at the end, by all means, please feel free to come up and ask anything about services. But I appreciate you listening today. Thank you.